Hello friends, we will be discussing the concept of exceptions to the law of supply now. Now, whatever law of supply that we have discussed earlier, there are certain exceptions that you need to be aware of in order to understand the concept of law of supply in depth. Let's understand with the first part of it. The normal law of supply is widely applicable to the large number of goods is what they've mentioned. However, there are certain exceptions to it on which a change in the price of good does not lead to change in its supply quantity in the same direction. Like the original law states that every increase in the price, or rather every change in the price, leads to increase in the quantity supplied. This law is not applicable on certain goods, or rather in certain situations. Let's understand which exactly those situations are. The law supply is not a universal principle that applies to all market under all circumstances. There are in fact numerous important exceptions to this law of supply, which are: the first would be expected change in the price of a good. If at all there is expected change in the price of the good, which I've already studied, especially in the terms of demand here, that is also again in this category. So while an actual change in the price of the good leads to change in its supply in the quantity, or rather supply in its change in supply quantity in the same direction, an expected change in the price of the supply is in the opposite direction. When the price of the good is expected to increase, suppliers decreases the supply quantity so as to avoid selling at lower prices in the current period and sell more even at the higher prices in the future period. So if at all the price is going to decrease as the expected change that we're keeping, then in that cases the supplier stops the quantity that is supposed to be supplied at that price, so that in near future when the prices increase, that time they can increase the quantity here. That is one exception here. The next exception has been mentioned as market power. If the supply side of the market is controlled by a smaller number of sellers, then the law of supply might not operate. That means if this is a monopolistic competition, basically where there are only less number of sellers and more number of buyers, that is when, for example, that can be a tire manufacturing company, or rather tire as a product itself. There are very less manufacturers in India who manufacture tires, or rather who produces tires. So that is a monopolistic competition, and that is the same thing that we're talking about. So if there are less number of sellers, for example in the case of monopoly, single seller may not necessarily offer larger quantity even though the price is higher. Market control by monopolistic allows it to set the market price based on a demand condition and fix the quantity supplied without cost constraints being imposed by the supplied side. So monopolistic competitions, they have certain market condition, market restrictions that they have to follow, and hence it becomes easier for them to operate them. However, this condition still prevails there. The next exception will be competition. In other market structures like oligopoly or monopolistic competition, sellers might be facing more competition, therefore offering to sell large quantities at lower prices. In the competition, or rather in a market where the competition is already going on, you struggle to maintain, or rather you struggle to survive in that market. So in that cases, even the seller starts selling higher number of quantities at a lower price. That is just to survive the struggle here. Now the next would be perishable goods. In cases of perishable goods, the supplier would offer to sell more quantities at lower price to avoid running into losses due to the damage of the product. Now if there are perishable goods, in that cases, if you have a lot of quantity of perishable goods, for example apples, now those goods are certain goods whereby you have a restricted time limit, where you have a time frame. If at all you're keeping those goods for more than that time frame, they might get perish, or rather they might get completely decayed, and you won't be able to sell them at any price you want to. Hence in such cases, even if you are fetching lower prices, you want to take out the stock completely. You want to clear off the stock so that you can fill in the fresh stock tomorrow. This happens when it comes to perishable good, and hence law of supply doesn't matter here, or rather it's an exception to the law of supply. Next would be legislation restricting quantity. Suppliers cannot offer to sell more quantities at higher price where the government has put regulations of quantity of goods to be offered, or the price ceiling at which good is supposed to be offered in the market. Producers are unable to play with either of the factors on their own. Now, if there is already a rule and regulation that has been governed, or rather that has been adhered to by the government here, in such cases you cannot do anything. It's a law, it's a rule that you have to follow. So if the government is saying that you're not supposed to sell out any goods at a higher price for more quantity, if they have already put up a price ceiling, or if rather if they've already set up that at this rate only this much quantity is supposed to go, nothing more than that, then you have to follow that part. Now, the last two exceptions here are agricultural products. Since the production of agricultural products cannot be increased beyond the limit, the supply can also not be increased beyond the limit. Even if the prices are higher, the producer is unable to offer larger quantities. Now, agricultural products are basically dependent on the season. So mango, do you figure out mango coming out in the month of June, July, August, September, October, November, December? Of course you don't. These are seasonal fruits, these are seasonal products. So once the season is gone, you won't be able to sell more of those quantities, or rather you won't even be able to sell mangoes in the first place, apart from mango shakes and other mango preservatives that we already have. But natural mango you won't be able to sell. Hence, agricultural products are completely beyond the scope of law of supply here. Hence, that doesn't matter. Now, the last one would be artistic and auction goods. The supply of such goods can be increased, or rather cannot be increased or decreased easily. Thus, it is difficult to offer larger quantities even if the prices shoot up. Now, the supply of such goods, that is auction goods. If you have a boat on auction, you cannot sell that auction, or rather, that is one unique piece that you have. You cannot have more of those pieces to be sold out. Hence, this law of supply is completely an exception here when it comes to artistic goods. So these are the exceptions that you need to understand when it comes to artistic goods being in picture. This is the same thing that you need to follow and understand how exactly you need to work when it comes to preservation, or rather understanding the exceptions of law of supply. So this is what you need to understand. This is all that we have in this video when we have discussed about laws, or rather exceptions for the law of supply here. Thank you.